Center. Dr. Palmer has a PhD in Leadership Studies and a Master of Science in Human Resource Counseling from North Carolina A&T State University, and an undergraduate degree in Business Administration from Winston-Salem State University.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing. All right. So moving right along, we wanted to take the opportunity for you all to represent the parts of the state that you're from. So we wanted you all to utilize, there is a feature if you at the top of your screen, or perhaps for some of you at the bottom of your screen, to annotate with your initials onto the map here that's in front of you, which county or the city that you are from. So there is an annotate feature. If you go down to the main screen, there should be a place where you can click the annotate feature, and then you can just either type your name or the name of your organization or your initials onto the map. We want to see where you're from, what you're representing. So take a moment to do that. Oh, wow, we're really filling up the map. This is great. Looks like we have representation from all over the state. This is awesome. Wow, I see some people are doing some interpretive drawings there. It's looking good. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Yes, and that kind of gives us an idea for where the communities that we're representing and how important it is for us as a network to work with one another. Okay, we're getting a little creative here. Okay, awesome. So thank you all for representing where you're from, your cities, your counties, the communities in which you serve. This is really good to see. So thank you all. I'm gonna continue on to our next slide. And if you haven't had a chance to annotate where you're from, feel free to put it in the chat box so we know that you're here and you're representing. Okay, let me go back and erase this for just 1 second. All right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Palmer to introduce our capacity building framework for nonprofit management. Dr. Palmer?
Thank you, Salima, and good morning, everyone. How about that annotate function? I see in the chat that some of you use annotate for the first time. So glad we were able to offer something right off the bat that was different. Again, my task today is to orient us to the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits Capacity Building Framework for Nonprofit Management. And one of the pieces of information or documents that has been out in our communities and utilized across the state is the Principles and Practices Guide that was developed by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. In the state of North Carolina, of course, the North Carolina Center is our statewide association for capacity building with nonprofit organizations. In the country, however, and correct me if I'm wrong, Salima or Rebecca, but there are 38 associations. So in the country, 38 states are represented by an association, and each of those associations, for the most part, have guiding principles and practices, and they also have a document like our guide to assist nonprofits with understanding primary and fundamental management functions. So that's our springboard for today. And what we're going to learn about is we're going to learn a little bit more about the 12 principles that guide this process or that are fundamental to our framework. We're going to focus on management condition. We're going to look at 3 frames of managing a nonprofit in terms of growth and development. We're going to engage in 2 assessment activities as it relates to capacity. And we're going to dive deeper into the practices of the 6 principles that are highlighted in this Management Institute over the next 5 sessions. So that is our capacity building framework. So inside the Principles and Practices Guide, there is a visual that gives us an indication of how to use the guide. Again, those elements that I just shared are highlighted there. And then for each principle, there is a primary practice, and then there are elements or descriptions of what each frame or management condition entails. So again, our Principles and Practices Guide. We're going to start with working on and learning a little bit more about the 12 principles. So in your packet of information that you received, and I do believe we're going to highlight this here on the screen, you have a worksheet. And that worksheet is, it has a list of 12 blank lines. And on this sheet, or you can use a piece of paper if you don't have this printed off, on this sheet, you're going to write for us what you consider to be significant areas of work, or what you consider to be components of what makes for a strong nonprofit organization. In particular, as we think about management, because that is our focus in this institute, is nonprofit management. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to create that list. And again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put that in the chat, or and Salima and or Rebecca will acknowledge your questions. This is the 12 Principles Worksheet. It's titled the 12 Principles Worksheet. And you'll recognize it in that it has numbers 1 through 12, and then they're blank lines. And your task is to generate a list of what you consider to be important components of a strong or a robust nonprofit from a management perspective. And if you would, just kind of show me with your thumbs up function as when you get to the end of your list of 12. No Googling. I see Shanna's going, what? Yeah, no Googling. And especially if your video is turned off, just give me an idea, again, maybe using the thumbs up function or reaction to just give me an idea when you get to the end of your list. Thank you, Shanna. I see your comment in the chat. Salima and or Rebecca, there's a comment in the chat about receiving information.
Yes, I'll chime in here. The handouts were provided as a link in your reminder email that had the same Zoom link. So if you go back to that email, you should be able to pull up that link, but let me know. Oh, we've got 2 people that said they had trouble with that. So yeah, just go back to that email that was sent to you as a reminder with the Zoom link, and you'll see the link for the handouts there. It's an extranet link. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Yep. Oh, there we go. Salima, thank you.
That's not the one. It's the it is the 12 principles worksheet.
Okay.
And what I can also do is I can share the link for you all, Rebecca, or can put it in the chat where you can find the extranet handouts. So it was sent on yesterday, but this is what the worksheet looks like. So we'll write down the 12 principles that you think for strong governance of a nonprofit.
Thank you, Salima.
Thank you.
Rebecca, there was one comment there. One person said that they didn't receive a reminder. So, you know, I'm not sure if that person could maybe put their email in the chat.
Okay.
And then we can make sure, because we're going to be referring to about 5 or 6 documents today that you're going to need. Yeah, thank you.
And you can click that link to access to all the handouts that was sent on the email on yesterday. If you have any further questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are going to engage in a mapping activity so that we can see what management functions or components of management as a group or as a cohort that we identified. Rebecca, are you?
Yes. Okay. Yep, we're gonna try this out, everyone. I'm putting a link in the chat box, and if you'll go in there and originally we were going to have you list as many as you could as you have on your list, but go ahead and just pick one that you think is maybe your top one, and we'll see the word mapping. We'll see what populates here. I'll go ahead and pull this up and share my screen once everyone has responded. So we're getting some too that are coming through the chat, and that's certainly okay too. I'm seeing equity, transparency, communication. Yep. Let me go to my here. Okay. Come in. Give just another minute or so.
Yep. I see communication, financial responsibility, intentionality, equity, human resources, leadership, an engaged board, strategic planning,
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you all can
Yeah.
see some of the responses that came in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's try this here. Go to full screen. Changes. There we go. All right, can you all see this? So the big ones here, we've got management, financial, communication. These are huge ones, yes. And then after that, looks like we've got leadership. I'm gonna move my screen around here. There we go. Strong organization. Evaluation was another big one that came through. Staff was another big one that came through. As you can see, some of these words that are populated. So if you haven't used this before, the idea is that the ones that come in the most responses are the biggest, and down to the smaller ones. You'll see some of the smaller ones here in red. This is really
And it's looking like too that there are 7 that dominate, that are significantly larger, and then the others look to be about the same size, in terms of what it is that I see.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So those 7 are management, financial, communication, leadership, strong organization, evaluation, and staff.
And staff.
So
Mhm.
we have kind of 7 dominant ones from the group in terms of what we consider to be important functions in which nonprofits lead and manage. So that gives us a general kind of idea of what we're thinking this morning. And so what we want to do next is we want to compare this list that we've generated together to the 12 principles that are identified by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits as being fundamental to managing nonprofit organizations. So in your information, there is a sheet, there is a handout titled Principles and Practices Definitions. I think we can also show that on the screen so that you can see. And I did see a couple of notes in the chat about getting your handouts and getting the link and information earlier. And so we will work to do that for next week's session.
Yes.
Was everybody able to locate the principles and practices definitions handout? Can we show that one on the screen as well? Thank you. So in terms of just comparing, so as I mentioned before, what we were able to list out was management, finances, communication, leadership, strong organization, evaluation, and staff. So let's do a little bit of comparing and contrasting here to just identify kind of how close we were to the 12 principles that we have identified at the NC Center. So we didn't have advocacy and civic engagement as our top 7, not that we didn't have it, but it didn't dominate. And that is one of the principles. Now, when you look at our list, these are in alphabetical order, not in terms of priority. So just as a FYI. And then principle number 2 was board governance. And what I find interesting of the 7 that were more dominant in our map, board development or board of directors or board governance didn't dominate, at least it didn't this morning. And so that was number 2. Number 3, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Number 4 is financial management. That did make our list, our map. And then fundraising, we could align fundraising with finances, that would make sense, but it didn't dominate this morning. Human resources is another one that is number 6 of the principles for the center. Information and technology is number 7. Number 8 is legal compliance and transparency. Number 9 is partnerships and collaboration. Number 10, program design, management, and evaluation. 11 is strategic communication. Communication did make our list. Strategic planning might also be aligned, which is number 12, with strong organization. That could be an element of that. Evaluation made our list, could also align with number 10, since we're talking about evaluation of programs. This one on our list, because of the question, is more in line maybe with organizational evaluation. And then of course, staff is another element of that. Human resources would be a connecting principle with staff. So here are our principles and practices, and these are our definitions. In the chat, if you would comment, is there anything that surprised you, or was there anything noted on our list, meaning our map, compared to what the center has identified as its 12 principles? Anything surprise you? Anything kind of stand out for you? Or do you have any general comments about that list? And at this time, if there's anyone who has a real quick comment, just let us know and we can unmute you so that you can comment. Is there anyone who'd like to? Marquita, do I see your hand? Could we unmute Marquita?
Hi, okay. So I was not surprised to see advocacy, but I know that a lot of nonprofits, and we're busy doing our work and we forget that we need to advocate for the support or the people that we represent. And our organization has an advocacy arm or a coalition where we represent other nonprofits around personal finance management and that sort of thing. And all of the work that we do is very important, but it needs advocacy to run to be sustainable. And I just, appreciate seeing this on the list. I'm going to mute myself because I've got associates here.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Marquita. And so again, these are the 12 principles that are considered to be fundamental to managing nonprofits. Of course, at the North Carolina Center, we are consistently and continuously reviewing and editing and modifying our principles and practices to remain current and to also to be in alignment with what we know to be true in terms of what it takes to manage a nonprofit on a day-to-day basis. Before I move on to the next component of our capacity building framework, I'm just going to give you just a couple of minutes to spend some time with these definitions, because we're going to be adding on and building on to the framework. So this is part 1, and I'm just going to kind of give us a little bit of silence here and give you all time to just review each principle and the accompanying definition.
While they're doing that, Dr. Palmer, I did want to share some of the other feedback that was in the chat as far as what was surprising to find. Christy said that technology was a surprise. Shanna said, I appreciate that info and technology is a principle, often a given or assumed ingredient. Good to see it as a defining principle. Jen K said she was surprised about IT and tech was blown out. Adriana mentioned, I think we do tend to think of boards in terms of development, not in terms of governance. Jamie Meyer mentioned information and technology is something I think nonprofits struggle with. I would agree with that, Jamie. Stephen mentioned interested in thinking about which items more pertain to the board responsibilities. It's a good point there. Christy mentioned that core values and ethics didn't make it. Corey mentioned that she agrees with Stephen about board versus staff responsibilities. These are good questions to consider. Wendy mentioned, like Corey, I was surprised I didn't include more of what is actually on the list, given that we do so many of these principles every day. Corey also agreed with Christy around core values and ethics. And then around advocacy, Katina mentioned that in agreement with Marquita, that advocacy sometimes falls under development or marketing, but needs to be both a staff and board priority. Adriana mentioned being amazed equity wasn't at the top of mind for more of us. So these are really great comments. I just wanted to share just a few of them. So many more continue to populate the chat. So please feel free to add that as you're working on reviewing these definitions.
I hope that has given everyone a little bit more time to kind of sit with the different principles. And as indicated in the chat and in even Marquita's comments, it is, we understand and have a sense of what these 12 are. The definitions as defined by our framework may be a little bit unique in some regards. So I just wanted us to sit with that for a minute. The next part of the framework is management condition and or conditions of management. And our framework is generated around 3 frames: build, thrive, and sustain. And if we could show the approach and framework handout, that's what I'm going to next. And so these are our 3 management conditions. And basically the way that we view this is that our nonprofit organizations might find themselves in terms of growth and development. We might find ourselves in a build posture, a thrive posture, or sustain posture. And we have labeled and named those current condition. And so when you look at build, we're talking about a nonprofit meeting its legal requirements and operating with fundamental components of governance and nonprofit management. So in some ways, the fundamentals. And then in terms of thrive, the nonprofit demonstrates, meaning those of us that are involved, the board, the staff, volunteers, etc., have a working knowledge of governance, oversight, and nonprofit management. And that's demonstrated or shown in how the nonprofit handles its day-to-day operations by individuals that serve on the board and also the staff. This idea of sustain is that the nonprofit has demonstrated that it is capable of moving into a posture or condition of sustainability. And that is demonstrated by a few things that are outlined here. One, the nonprofit organization is considered an asset to its community. It has stable revenue streams, meaning it has experienced some consistency in receiving dollars into the organization. There is an operating reserves, maybe not exactly the amount that we want it to be, but there is evidence that there is a reserve. The programs are robust. There is a track record of good programming. Governance is strong. Board, meaning the board of directors are engaged and active. There's respect from peers in the nonprofit sector of that nonprofit and that community, and also the constituents that the nonprofit serves. So in terms of our framework, again, we started with principles. We have 12 of those. And now we're looking at, well, how do we identify where our nonprofit is in terms of how it is being managed. And so there you have build, thrive, and sustain. What we want to do now is we want all of us to go into a breakout session where you will engage with your classmates, if I could call it a class, in a discussion as to what is the difference for each frame. What do you see as being the primary difference as it relates to the current management condition of a nonprofit using our frames? What do you see as the difference in each of these? So we're going to go into breakout sessions. Rebecca, I'm going to pass it over to you to guide us.
Sure thing, sure thing. So hopefully everyone understands exactly what you're going to be discussing. My understanding, Dr. Palmer, is they're going to be talking about the differences.
Yes, they're going to be talking about the difference in the current conditions that they have.
Okay.
One thing I didn't say is if you would self-select a person to report back for your group. So if you would self-select once you get in your group, a person to report back, and now we just need to go into the breakout sessions.
Perfect. So it's about 10:15 now. How long would you like the breakout sessions to go for?
Let's do about 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and open up all the rooms. You'll get a notification when the rooms are about to close with 60-second warning. And here we all go.
I think we are all back in our classroom again, if I could call it that. So Rebecca, how many groups did we have?
We had 10 groups.
Okay, so if you could, whoever was identified as the person to report back, just let us know, and we will unmute you so that you can start. I see Marisa is the report back person, so if we could unmute her.
Thank you. And you said my name right. Oh my goodness.
Oh.
No one ever gets that on the first try. Okay, so
Nice to meet you.
So we said in the build category that most of the time that's going to be a new nonprofit that has a new board. They're newbies, so they're just learning the ways, and they're gonna eventually get to thrive, but and then we got into talking about longevity, and that doesn't always mean that they're at the sustaining section. They could be at the thriving if they don't have the right management. And we talked about that management is critical for taking an organization from the thriving to sustaining, and that policies and staff are also important so that they don't move backwards, because at some point they could be at sustainability, but if they are not evaluating, doing that constant evaluation, because the world is changing. And we got into talking about, you know, can you pivot? And they gave the example of COVID. Are you taking your programs virtual? Is there social changes that you have to adjust? And if you're not adjusting, then you're going to be moving back a section. And it's very critical to have the right management, the board governance, and to be able to, as we said, pivot. And I think that is it. Sorry, reading through my notes.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? We've got 9 more to go. So if you could just use your reaction. I see Janetta Richardson. If we could unmute her.
I'll go ahead and unmute her.
Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Good morning. I was with group 1, and we kind of we talked about how we're all kind of like new organizations and we feel like we're all over the place and we're building while we're dealing with constant change. So far as the building, what stood out to us was the legal requirements, like staying in compliance with within your community, making sure you stand in compliance with the clients that you're going to be serving. And then with the Thrive part, what stood out most to us was that a good, strong board. You need a strong board starting out, of people that are dedicated to the mission and committed to the mission of the organization to help build and while you're building, staying within compliance as you move in each piece, and also have some measurable track records each phase that you're going through as you're getting started. With the sustainability, especially with what's going on today, you want to continue to evaluate yourself with each phase that you're going through, because you're constantly building while changing with the constant change that's going on around us. So it was more about strong board commitment and making sure you have a good, dedicated group of people that's willing to stick in there for the long haul to get things going and do the things that need to be done for the organization. And I hope I said everything, group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jen K. Thank you, Jen.
I'm reporting for Group 5. I think probably like many groups, we talked about the importance of flexibility and pivoting and how key that is to sustaining and surviving. And that came back to having a really core set of values or ethics that you can always come back to, really having a well-defined mission. And when you have that and have your finances, your fundraising stream in order, both of those things help you make that pivot. You know what you're pivoting on, those core values, and then not having to constantly worry about money gives you freedom. We also talked about having maybe one of the metrics you could use to kind of determine where your organization is what is your succession plan. If your executive director or your leader rolls off, gets hit by a bus, whatever, that person is no longer in the picture, how quickly can your organization respond and keep going? I think if you're in a sustainable position, your board, whomever, can quickly snap into place and keep the organization going. Whereas if you are a new nonprofit and your founder leaves, you may be floundering. So how strong is your management and how quickly can you fill in? And then last week, we also talked about your different principles may be at different levels. Your connections may be sustainable. You may be a grassroots organization, and no matter what happens, those connections are really going to help keep you going. Whereas your fundraising may not be, you may still be struggling with that. Whereas a foundation may be flipped. They may not have many community connections, but they know money is not a problem. So different organizations, different structures are going to have different ways to evaluate.
Yeah, and one thing we do know is that there's no magic recipe, and it depends on where we are in our growth and development as a nonprofit, who's leading. There's so many contingencies. And so thank you so much for that feedback. Corey, I think I see is going to respond for that group.
Yep, I was with Group 8, and we came to a similar observation as Jen mentioned, that you could be potentially in one condition with part of your organization or your programming or your development, but not with others. Some of us have organizations that are 50 years old, but have been through ups and downs, and some things may be really well developed where others are not. The thing that I think we all agreed was, as you move to the right in the management conditions chart, if you're further to the right, you have the ability and the space to fail sometimes. And one of our team members mentioned a corporate study apparently that a lot of large corporations may have 10 programs in development, and they expect that 7 of them are going to fail. So they're counting on 30% success on these programs, and most of us just don't have that level of stability. So I think our kind of conclusion was we're all in different places with different things, but in terms of the overall organization, if you're truly sustainable, you can take some risks and you can fail. And if I missed anything, Group 8, just put it in the chat.
Thank you. And I would encourage all of us to make notes as our co-participants are sharing feedback from the groups. Again, we can definitely learn from each other in terms of perspective. So my next leader is Valerie.
Great. A lot of what we covered, I think, has been said, so I'll hit points that haven't maybe been.
Thank you.
We definitely just recognize the difference as you move from left to right and the breadth and depth of each of the factors, the core factors that are listed. We talked about COVID being kind of a litmus test as to your sustainability, and maybe organizations that felt that they were in the thrive or sustaining category. COVID has really posed some real challenges in that area. One of our participants talked about just the difference between thriving and sustaining, and kind of some of the markers that can be helpful in moving from kind of jumping across the line there. And then lastly, we talked about something someone I think referenced, which is you can largely be in sustainability mode for many of those principles, but maybe lagging in others. And I personally shared an example for our nonprofit that the advocacy area is one that has been more lagging for us, and in light of those real equity goals is one that's really risen to the top as where to really focus efforts from here on out. So hope I covered our points well.
Thank you. Maria.
Yeah, so I think I was part of Group 6. Some of the things that we mentioned that we noticed with that these different approaches or the different components or pieces to this build on top of each other. So like Thrive has components of build, and then Sustain has components of build and thrive. And so it was sort of like a linear progress. And now that I'm talking about it, one thing that would be interesting to see is what this would look like if it was a circular framework. I'm a big fan of circles, but I wonder what, how that would affect the progress. If you're like, you're moving along and then you go back, you take like Corey, I think mentioned, you fail in something and you kind of take a couple of steps back, what that would look like. And then I guess one of the aspects that I had a question on was in the Sustain piece where it says respect from peers and constituents it serves. And so this to me was like, well, why isn't this in every single piece of the process? But then Wendy brought up like this might be a piece where we're talking about recognition from the community and what that, that partnership piece and recognition from the community that builds on that specific aspect. And then I think one of the pieces that I love from this, especially from the Sustain portion, is the evaluation, the emphasis on evaluation, which is a place where I would like to believe in our organization is making sure that we are evaluating all the pieces of the things that we do and record keeping, and how important that is when it comes to figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and how it impacts your community, how it impacts organizational culture. So those are some of the things that came up in our group.
Thank you. And we do know, in terms of when you look at the full scope of management functions, there are different models that exist. There are different frameworks that exist. And so there are some models that do take into consideration, for example, a quantitative way of rating where the nonprofit is. However, in some ways that boxes in nonprofits. And so as we dig deeper today, we'll talk a little bit more about the particulars and the specifics as it relates to each principle along the 3 frames. So next, Shanna, and I think I'm missing 2 names. Is Shanna's next, then Jerry, but that's only 8 groups. So I hope I'm not missing anybody. Shanna, you're up next.
Okay, it's Shauna like Donna.
Shauna, okay,
Yes.
Shauna, okay.
So I was a part of group 3, and the 2 primary words that I heard, we talked a lot about continuum and understanding and navigating the continuum between all 3 build, thrive, sustain conditions. We talked about staff strengths and utilizing the strengths and being honest and admitting when there's deficit, or knowing what you know and building on that, wearing many hats, and being honest about when we need to supplement the staff strengths, especially when we're all working with limited staff. The P word came up, the ability to pivot in order to continue the continuum. And that sustainability doesn't necessarily mean that you are good and that you're on cruise control, because at any given moment, everything will be shifting, which will ignite the ability to pivot. We talked a lot about what's happening during COVID and that need to pivot. One of my classmates said that her organization falls into all 3 spaces at any given moment, and that at any given moment. Another Rose said that this is a great tool to use for any time that you're doing strategic planning. So a way to just make sure that you're touching this, if not throughout the year, definitely on an annual basis. Latoya said that there's external factors that within your community partners, or that may affect your financial support in a matter of minutes, that by force or by choice was what she said, that force the continuum to constantly slide. And Mary S. said the continuous growth and quality to maintain the continuum, you have to engage the pivot to meet the needs of the community. I think I represented group 3 well. Yes.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you. The next is Jerry.
Good morning, everyone. I think a lot of what our group touched on, and I don't remember the number, my apologies, was talking on the idea of that circle that was brought up before, that you kind of shift back and forth between the different components at different times, and that's okay. It's one of the things that I always like to echo. We are people that are doing change in the community, that are being involved with things. We have to answer new needs and be a part of new conversations as they come up, and welcome new people to the table to have those conversations with us. So I think a lot of it is just saying, okay, right now we're at sustain on these few. We know that we're at build on these, and that's cool. No problem. We'll get there. And then some of the sustained things, they'll fall backwards because something new will have developed, and we'll need to kind of figure out how to re-achieve to that. And then we just kind of spent some time talking over specific examples, and definitely talking, as someone else has said, about the litmus test that COVID-19 has been on what our programming is actually in sustain mode, and finding out that, you know, we might not quite be there as fully as we thought we were, and can use this as a good chance to evaluate within our organization and through partnerships where we can improve our work. All right, if I forgot anything, team, feel free to drop in the comments.
Thank you so much. Is it Adriana?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Adriana Adriana's great. Thank you. Our group brought up a lot of the same points and thinking through how you can be in different stages. But then we also talked through how a lot of that might have to do with what's internal and externally facing for the organization, and who you're accountable to for what might lead to progression in these areas. So perhaps because you're accountable to funders or foundations for dollars, you grow in certain areas, or you get yourself to sustainability faster because you have to be accountable for that program evaluation. And so you get yourself to that place faster. Whereas maybe your internal functions, like your staff development, kind of fall to the wayside, or you don't use those dollars that you set aside, quote unquote, for your staff development, because you might not be accountable for that. And, you know, as we were sitting here talking through some of this, it made me turn my head and my eye, and might be because this is my role at my organization, towards equity then, because if we are accountable to outside groups, which might often have less of an equity focus, I think we might be getting there as a society, but we might then think about our internal organizations who have these high turnover. We think about staff of color that are often leaving and are often not in leadership roles, and sadly, and so there's this high turnover rate. And so looking at our internal functions, we might not be accountable for those things, and we just are looking at these outside foundations who might not be led by people of color. And so we are perpetuating inequities as we go and growing in ways that are inequitable. And so where are we, how are we perpetuating that? So that's where my mind started to go to, but looking at internal and external forces.
Thank you. And that's 9 groups. So I think I'm missing one person. If you could, or maybe not. Is it Michael? Is that okay? Hi, Michael. You're up next. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Yes.
Well, first, I think our group, I think the biggest thing that we came away with, one in the group actually made a comment about losing 4 staff members, and it just, it rang true with me, especially. And in full disclosure, Jen and Rose, who were in this seminar, are job share members of the team. We're a very, very small nonprofit. And for us, the institutional memory is something I'm continuously trying to work on. COVID has made it a little bit more challenging because there's things that, you know, we need to do in the office. But I would suggest too, and Rose and Jen, I hope they agree, that I think we, in our current condition, is sustained. We're an organization that's 20 years old this year, but the institutional memory transfer is vitally important. The ability to communicate with one another, and we're at a bit of a crossroads right now. For the first time since I've been there, and I've been there for 18 of the 20 years of the organization's history, is finding good, solid board members that want to engage and communicate, because I think everything else in the sustained condition, I think we're in pretty good shape. So.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was great feedback. And the way I'd like to kind of close out this part of our learning and move into the next piece of information is to say that sometimes I think we're a little hard on ourselves because we want to grade ourselves, like give our nonprofit a grade. And many of you said this in your responses that, you know, there are a lot of contingencies that determine what our perception or what we might view as being success or accomplishments, or, you know, some might argue that, you know, if you're able to note that you're in sustain across all 12 of these principles, then hey, you are well on your way, and longevity is in your future. But we also know that there are nonprofits that have maintained that particular posture or condition, and overnight we wake up and in the paper they're no longer in existence. So I think that, you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact of some of the very things that you all shared. It depends on where the nonprofit leaders, how they want that nonprofit to grow, or not. You know, not every nonprofit's plan is to be the largest in town, for example, or there are some nonprofits who purposefully and intentionally are smaller and grassroots oriented. And so when we are planning, someone mentioned strategic planning. When you're going through that process, you know, that is a time to decide, you know, where do we want to be, you know, down the road. And it may not necessarily be that we want to be the largest, as I said, in the community. So the way in which we want you to consider our framework is that it gives us a way to benchmark where we are. It's like a temperature gauge. We don't suggest that you have to be in a certain or you don't have to be in a certain condition in order for you to be successful, for example. That is a decision that is determined by the leadership of your organization. Someone else mentioned this, but what we would like you to do is to consider our framework and to utilize this framework to begin dialogue and conversation around what is it, how do you want to grow and develop over time? And so I'll kind of couch my comments there in terms of as we look at these different management conditions. So we've talked about principles. We've been introduced to those. We have spent some time with the management conditions in terms of a way of framing where our nonprofits might be in terms of day-to-day operations and management. And now we're going to move into assessing the principles across these frames. So if I could thank you so much. There we go. So we have 12 principles. And for each principle, we're going to ask you to identify where your nonprofit is in terms of build, thrive, or sustain. So you're going to choose the one that best aligns with where your nonprofit is at the present time. We've already gone over the 12 principles. There is a worksheet that you're going to use, and it's titled the Principles Capacity Assessment Worksheet. We have another person on our team, Leslie, who is going to show us what that worksheet looks like. And bear with me for a moment because I just want us to know what documents we're using. So we're going to use the Principles Capacity Assessment Worksheet. So that is what that document looks like. And we're also going to use the Principles Capacity Assessment. Before you leave here, Leslie, what I do want to point out again is that you're going to be indicating for each principle, you're going to choose one as to where your nonprofit is at the present time. Leslie, you can go to the Principles Capacity Assessment. I just want them to see what that handout looks like. And then we're going to go back to the PowerPoint slide, and we're going to look at one as an example. Is everybody doing okay? Thumbs up, Yeah, okay, good, great, thank you.
Is it this one?
That is it, thank you. So in your packet, you have a practice, we are going to principles, Leslie. We're going to do principles capacity assessment. So what we basically did is we took the principles and practices guide and we kind of pulled it apart for you and put it in the form of these handouts. All the information that we're going over is in the principles and practices guide is in its entirety. In your packet, you should have a, it should be a principles capacity assessment. It should be titled that. And it should show 3 principles per page. And for each principle, it's going to show the description of that principle, and then each of the frames has a unique, thank you, each of the frames has a unique description for each of the frames for build, thrive, and sustain. Thank you, Stephen. So here we are going to be looking specifically at the principles across the management conditions. So ultimately, we're going to use the worksheet to check off which one best describes where our nonprofit is at the present time. So what I want to do first, before we go specifically into you actually rating, I want you to spend some time with this piece of information. I also want to make sure at this point that everybody has access to this document. If you could put in the chat if you do not have access to this document. If you do not. If you do, I am going to give us a few minutes to spend with this document. So you've got all 12 principles. You have the definition, which we've already covered, which is at the top of each principle. And then you've got the 3 frames that are uniquely defined or described for each of the build, thrive, and sustain. If you haven't printed it out, that's absolutely fine. The first thing we're going to do is I want you to read through the document and read through each of the principles in terms of build, thrive, sustain. And then I'm going to give us just about 2 to 3 minutes to do that for each one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rate these. I shouldn't say rate. Rate is not what we're doing. We're going to indicate, we're going to mark which frame best aligns with where your nonprofit is at the present time. I do believe the link that was sent out, I see a question in the chat about the form and whether or not it's a Google Doc form.
Yes, Dr. Palmer, the
Yes.
form is a PDF. Maria commented if you're using the PDF file, you can use that highlighter tool to check off boxes. And that'll help you to be able to keep track. Thank you for that feedback, Maria.
Is there anyone that does not have access to the document that's shown on the screen, meaning you cannot read through it? Okay, great. So there's going to be a little bit of quiet for you to read through each of the 12 and to mark where you think your nonprofit is at the present time. So Leslie, if you could scroll through, yeah, thank you. And give us some indication when to, yeah, then we'll just move that along, Leslie, as we go. Thank you. Leslie, you can go ahead and move up. I think we'll let it rest here, yeah, for a couple of minutes. Okay, you can go ahead and move Leslie to the next. it's hard for me to tell if there's actually, how many people actually need to see it on the screen as opposed to accessing it themselves. So we'll just, and Leslie, you can go ahead and move. If I am going too fast, please let me know. Or if I'm going too slow, please let me know. All right, if that is okay, we've got one more, and that is principle number 12. And thank you for the feedback in the chat. Please share with us your thoughts as they arise throughout all of our sessions. So. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint, Leslie, and so this part of our process, again, just to kind of remind us of how we're learning about the capacity building framework and in alignment with fundamental principles as it relates to nonprofit management. So we've looked at the guide, we're kind of tearing it apart, breaking it down. We've looked at principles in terms of what they are, in terms of a definition or description of each principle. We've looked at management condition to try to understand or at least have a frame for identifying where our nonprofits might be across build, thrive, and sustain. And we've now taken that a step further to look at the unique characteristics of each frame as it aligns with the principles and ask you to identify or benchmark where you think you are at the present time. And so you would have a number of builds, and you're now able to see which of the principles in terms of where you are in terms of build. The same with thrive and the same with sustain. What we want to do now is we want to focus on the principles that are going to be the focal point in terms of topics for the Management Institute. And so if we could, Leslie, take me back to the, yes, thank you. So the specific areas of management that we're going to focus on in the Institute is board governance, program design, management and evaluation, strategic planning, fundraising, financial management, and human resources. So these are going to be the 6 capacity assessment topics and focal points that we're going to focus on. But before I move on, though, I do want to kind of emphasize that, you know, this is giving us an overview of all 12 principles, but we're going to hone in on 6 as it relates to the Institute. But in terms of the exercise that you just engaged in, take me back a slide. Yeah, maybe one more. Okay, so in terms of, like I said, the ones that we're going to focus on is are the 6. The exercise that you just did, you went through all 12. So what I would like to do is just kind of get some general feedback. I saw a few comments in the chat, but if you would like to give any verbal feedback, if you would just let us know and we'll unmute you. Trying to see if anybody, Corey would like to give some feedback.
Just that this is really helpful and good content, but I'm also feeling a little discouraged about where our organization is.
Please don't, please don't. Please don't. I want you to be encouraged. I don't want you to be discouraged. I want you to be encouraged that we have resources available to support us in moving in whatever direction it is that your nonprofit decides that it wants to move. In the introduction, Rebecca shared with you that I too am an executive director of a nonprofit here in Guilford County. And it is a grassroots nonprofit. We started it in 2009. We do some youth programming. We are Medicaid endorsed. We provide some outpatient therapy to mostly school-age children. It is a decision that we've made to be grassroots and the size that we are. So I don't want us to be discouraged. I want us to be encouraged to continue to do the work and learn more about managing nonprofits to achieve the goals that are identified by your unique organization in your community. This is not intended to be a grading exercise. It is intended to be an illuminating exercise to help us to hone in on where we are and then make some strategic decisions about how to grow and develop in the direction that we choose. So I want to definitely continue to voice that as we go through this process. For some, when we go through a process of assessing the capacity of our nonprofit, it could be overwhelming because we're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to do all these things in order to get to sustain. Well, if your nonprofit is overall in the thrive, let's just say frame, it doesn't necessarily mean that's doom and gloom, because there are probably quite a bit of what you're doing that is changing the landscape of your community. And so we want to make sure that you are making decisions about how to grow and develop in a contextual way, as well as in terms of, you know, we want to do these 10 things in order that we make the shift. So there is some freedom in how it is that you manage your organization. Any other comments? I see, let's see.
Dr. Palmer, I'm coming in here to give you one from Mary.
Yes.
And this is a good one I think you can touch on, and it will be important to address. Will you overlay equity, diversity, and inclusion in the focus areas?
Yes. Yes, we will. When we went through our current principles with the existing principles and practices guide, we had identified that equity, diversity, and inclusion was a single principle, but we also have since gone through the guide and identified which practices align with equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we're also looking to build out those principles so that we can be more intentional about that.
That's great. And then it looks like Adriana Adams, did you have your hand raised? I'll go ahead and ask to unmute you.
Yeah, I just, I've noticed in my time in nonprofit that a lot of our organizations have difficulty in knowing our role and how we do advocacy and civic engagement and what the lines are and how to get involved, especially if we're asking for donations, and how we interact, especially when it comes to politics and, you know, so I think direction is good, because obviously too, we usually have such strong connections to the people and the voices that need to be lifted up in the conversations that need to be had. And so I think it would be wonderful if we had direction in that. And I think that could be like equity and diversity inclusion woven in as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Rebecca or Salima, if you all want to speak just quickly about the EDI roundtables. I don't know if there's anyone on the call or in this class that have actually participated in those, but that's another way that the center has identified and tried to offer some direction by hosting those roundtables by individuals who understand how that works in practice.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Palmer. I think that's a great segue to something I was planning on mentioning later on. But for all of these principles, I just wanted to be clear. The center has resources that can help to support within the 12 principal areas. One of the things that Dr. Palmer mentioned around our EDI efforts were the roundtables that we've recently commenced, and it's a framework to build upon nonprofit management fundamentals with nonprofit executives all across the state to discuss how do you practically apply equity into the framework of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So how do you incorporate equity into your personnel practices? How do you incorporate equity into your hiring practices? So we're using those topical trainings to talk about equity amongst leaders across the state. So please feel free, if you haven't participated in them and you're interested in learning more about that, or you need resources to support you in any of the other 12 principal areas. If you need further resources, as Adriana mentioned, around advocacy and civic engagement, please feel free to reach out to the center or visit our website for our advocacy tools, archive webinars, our online library for additional resources, or you can reach out to me and my team and we'll be happy to direct you to resources or consultants that can help with any questions that you might have. So thank you for that.
And I do see a comment. I hope I'm not missing anything, Rebecca, but I do see a comment about having identified evidence of 2 frames, you know, so like 1 foot in one frame and another foot in the another frame. And that makes sense, you know, because our organizations are evolving and they're changing and they are unique and different, and on any given day, just like any assessment, you know, when we rate in the moment or when we identify in the moment, it could very well be different tomorrow. And so, you know, if you get that $1 million donation tonight, it changes a whole lot tomorrow, right? So the idea again here is to help us to have a way to think about and process and benchmark where we are so we can then make some decisions about how to shift. It makes all the sense in the world for me to see the comment as it is, that we may be in all 3. You know, it may be that, you know, there's some elements of all 3. But again, this is to give us a way to view and to see and envision where we are so that we can make some real specific decisions about how to shift or how to grow and how to develop outside of that. Could someone who commented in the chat about the two conditions give me some feedback of what I just said about that in terms of your sense of things?
Feel free to raise your hand if you would like to share.
Yeah.
Go ahead and unmute you.
Jen K, I see her hand.
Okay. Get down here.
As I was looking at them, it was more just that, you know, we hadn't met maybe enough of the points for sustain to feel like we were fully in that category. On our way, you know, it's sort of an on our way, on our way rating. But as many other folks are saying, I think it's fair to look at it as a continuum rather than these discrete boxes.
Thank you. Anybody else, just for the purpose of hearing an additional voice on that? Shauna, did I get it right that time? Yes, okay.
Yeah, so I'm very new to my organization, but I am familiar with the organization. It's about 10 years old. And what I was realizing, for example, in the principle of strategic communication, is that there's certain essential parts of the organization that we need to communicate that are in all three, build, thrive, and sustain. And what I think it would be best for us to do is to not rest on our laurels of the sustaining because everybody, you know, and that's got big giant quotes, everybody knows about the organization already, so there's certain things that we don't need to do. But we haven't maintained it consistently, so in a lot of spaces we're back to build. It doesn't mean we're back to square one, and it's not a negative thing. It's just that it's about maintenance and LaToya's word of the day, continuum.
Thank you for all of that feedback. So if I could just inquire with you in terms of just a little bit of engagement, what was the very first piece of information that I shared, if you would put it in the chat? What was the very first piece of information that I shared in this framework?
And Dr. Palmer, while people are answering in the chat, we did have a question from Christy. If we have an opportunity to pair with participants who are in the same management condition in one of the principles, we are not focusing on like information and technology. And my understanding is that this is really going to be contained to those 6 principles for this session. Our hope is that, our plan is that we will expand this out to cover the full 12 principles in the future. But I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that while folks were adding to the chat.
Well said, Rebecca. That is exactly where we are with that. Well said. We are focusing on these 6, and we are building out and thinking about how to further develop the other 6. So yeah, we are. So, Shauna, can you elaborate? Are you asking a question or?
I took a little time to recreate that circle because I was like, this is probably going to be important. And I feel like that's the first thing that you shared with us, which was a big circle of where we start at the top with the principles and practices. And then I think
I just wanted to make sure.
That's the first thing.
Yes, so we talked about the capacity building framework and that it has different parts to it. What was the next thing I shared? If you all would respond in the chat, what was the next thing? So we looked at the image of the capacity building framework, which is our framework for managing nonprofits, utilizing and incorporating these fundamental principles.
Yep, I think we've got Jackie Davis. I've gone ahead and give you permission.
Okay, all right, okay.
Okay, but that's not to this question though, Dr. Palmer. It was earlier. I just didn't know how to raise my hand. I'm sorry.
Okay, okay.
So I thought it was interesting, the 12 principles, how if I look at program design, management, and evaluation, with being a grassroots, and I was so heavily being, you know, in business for 10 years, I was so dedicated to the program design. So I would put that as sustained. And then management, I will put it thrive, and evaluation would be sustained. Yes. So within a principle, I'm at 3.
I got you.
I thought that was interesting. I wanted to share.
Yes, and that makes sense because, you know, I often say that sometimes we confuse a program of a nonprofit with the nonprofit. And really and truly, designing and managing and evaluating programs, if you are a nonprofit and you have 20 programs, you have 20 small businesses. Yeah. Does that make sense? You have 20 units, you have 20 small businesses that you're responsible for maintaining, you're responsible for evaluating, you're responsible for getting resources, and on top of that, you have your nonprofit that you're doing the exact same thing with from an organizational perspective. So makes all the sense in the world to me that you could assess and say, well, we're great in the design, but maybe not necessarily as it relates to evaluation. Point taken. Thank you. Yes. So it was the framework, and then what was next? Type in the chat what we did next. So we're building. We've got one more piece of information that we're going to close out with. We got the framework, we got the image of the framework, then what did we discuss next? Yes, we looked at the 12 principles. I see that pop up. And then we looked at the 12 definitions that align with those principles. I see management conditions. Then we studied the management conditions, and then we assessed across all 12 principles, we assessed where we are in terms of build, thrive, and sustain. I'd like to get a little bit of your understanding or a sense of your understanding with each of the principles having its unique description of what build, thrive, and sustain is. Any comments about that, either in the chat or if you want to share through audio? And Leslie, if you could take me back to the slide that has the circular image. Thank you. Any thoughts at all about where we are before we go into this final kind of part of our work today?
We're getting some feedback coming into the chat. Looks like well organized. It was really helpful to have the bullet points under each definition in order to best assess. With the definition only, it would have made some different assessments of where we fell. And a comment, are we going to take a break
Yes.
soon? I believe we
Yes,
are.
we
I'm
are.
feeling it
Yes,
well.
we
I'm
are.
gonna give a bio break for sure.
Yep, we are. Well, on that note, we'll take a break. So Rebecca, do you want to give some direction on how long our break is going to be and all that?
Sure. So our plan is, it's just 11:30 now. We're going to go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break. And so we'll convene back here at 11:35. And if you need a little bit extra time, don't worry, don't stress. Just come back and gather together around then. And we'll see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. It is 11:35. So as you begin to trickle back in, we want to re-welcome you again and hope that you are really enjoying the facilitation thus far and getting an understanding of our principles and practices document as we begin to walk you through the 6 principles that we'll be focusing on for this institute. And thank you so much, Dr. Palmer, for guiding us through each step, breaking it down so that it can begin to help us as nonprofit leaders to assess our organizations in areas that we can begin to build resources to build as we are wanting to progress through those management conditions. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Palmer. But what I'd like to do is, again, just make a couple of housekeeping announcements. We are recording today's session. We will break down, we'll edit the videos only for the portions where we've had the content shared as well as discussion. That will accompany the PowerPoint and the handouts that will be sent to you as a follow-up for today's session. So I just wanted to share that with you. You will get all of the handouts, the PowerPoint, and the edited videos. I also want to add that we placed a link for a survey that we'd like for you to complete in just a moment. Dr. Palmer is going to give you a little bit of lead into that. So if you didn't see it in your chat, we'll be sure to make sure we send it again in the event that you popped out of the Zoom and came back in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Palmer to guide us through how we're going to take the assessment on today.
Yes, so if I could, Leslie, if you could show the slide that has the 6 capacity assessment principles that we're going to focus on. And again, you know, these are going to be our topics moving forward according to the schedule that we have. So our primary topics for the Institute, again, is board governance, financial management, fundraising, human resources, program design, management and evaluation, and strategic planning. If you are looking at the principles and practices guide, again, these are in alphabetical order in the guide. You will see each principle, again, you'll see the primary practice, you'll see build, thrive, sustain, and you'll see all the practices that align with each of the frames. What we're going to do now is we are going to engage you in completing a capacity assessment for each of the principled areas. And we're going to do that using SurveyMonkey. And there is a link in the chat already for you. All you have to do is to click on that link. Before you do that, Leslie, if you would take me to the next slide. We're going to use fundraising as an example. So for each of those 6 practices, we have set up a way for you to assess where your nonprofit is across for each of the practices. And so you will identify here, you will identify what you want to enhance or what you want to work on. I'm going to repeat those instructions. For each of the principles, we have set up in SurveyMonkey a way for you to indicate which of the practices you want to and or need to work on. Now, another piece of information that you have, if you go back to the capacity assessment worksheet, you indicated how many of the principles you wanted to focus on in terms of, how many principles you indicated that you have under Build. You also have a total number under Thrive of those principles, and then also under Sustain. So that's another piece of information you can reference as well. So again, what we're going to do now is you have the link, and if you are not able to access that, please let us know. But you're going to go through each of the 6 principles. You're going to indicate which practices you want to enhance or that you need to work on. So this time around, you're not marking or noting where you are. You are marking and identifying those practices that you want to work on or that you want to enhance. Are we all together? Give me a thumbs up or give me a, yes, you will. We will talk about the results, yes. Once you submit this, we're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do with these results to help us to plan for the upcoming sessions as to what it is we need to focus on as a group. Does that help? So let us know if you are not able to access the survey. And if you're like me, I have my hard copy and I have what's in front of me in terms of the screen. You can reference those principles in your Principles and Practices guide. And you don't have to hurry, you don't have to rush. We've got time. If you have a question, please let us know. And can we go back to not screen sharing, just so that I can see everyone and I can kind of gauge if we have questions, or you can put in the chat and we can answer any questions as you go through each one.
And just to be clear, each of these you need to have, it's a required response for each section. So it seems like for some of you, you may not have any of them to check, unfortunately. And so it won't let you continue to the next section without it checking at least one. And that's something we can look into in terms of updating the survey, but yeah.
Okay.
I also want to mention while you're completing your survey, only you will have your organization's reports. They will not be shared with the group. So it's just unique to your nonprofit. It will not be distributed throughout.
Salima and Rebecca, there's a question about if the results, how the results will be reported back in the
Yes.
chat. This is from.
So your results will be sent as a PDF document as an attachment to each of the participants. So you will have a unique report out from the SurveyMonkey export download. So thank you for the question.
And we'll also have a collective, right? So we'll be able to see.
Yes, we can do a collective as well that can be shared with the entire group without any names or identifiers of the organization. Good question.
And the goal is for you to receive this prior to starting our topical sessions on next week, so that going into each of the sessions related to the 6 principles, you will, the idea, at least as your facilitator, is that you will have this as your benchmark. And these are the types of things you will be looking for answers to help you to be able to enhance your nonprofit's capacity moving forward. And that helps me to be more intentional about what it is that we are focusing on with each topic. And just also a reminder too, our Nonprofit Management Institute is curriculum based. And so we have developed a curriculum around each of the principles. So we want to be very intentional about what we share. And of course, taking into consideration the amount of time that we have to train.
It looks like most of the group has provided responses thus far. If
Good.
you need a couple more minutes, please feel free to indicate in the chat. Otherwise, I think we have a good majority completed. Okay. We need a few more minutes. Okay.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
We've got time, so for sure. And again, if you have questions as you're going along, we're paying attention to the chat. I'm trying to pay attention to the screen here to make sure I don't miss the opportunity to answer your question. Okay, Salima, how are we? I see done and here one.
We have a majority in. It looks like there are a couple of
Okay.
others that are still working just a bit. So I think we have a good majority complete. If you do need specific, more time specifically, please let us know. But I think for the most part, we're good to go, Dr. Palmer.
Okay, all right. If there are no objections to that, then we will proceed with our session today. So if I could take us back to the, in the PowerPoint slide, back to the guide with the cover and the how to read the guide and how to use it, and then the sample. So this is, and if this is not clear for you, it is in the Principles and Practices Guide that's also a part of your packet today, and also some of you may have a hard copy of that. So the purpose for today was for us to, as I've mentioned a few times today, is to really lay out the framework and to really introduce and explain, and also do some hands-on work with the principles and practices that have been adopted by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, and to help us all to better understand how to utilize this resource as a way to analyze, benchmark, temperature gauge where we are across 12 principles as it relates to nonprofit management and what we consider to be the fundamentals, or a core group of fundamentals as it relates to managing nonprofits. One of the things I'd like to do at this juncture is I would like to get a sense of where we are with your level of just understanding, and in terms of this being the foundation for moving forward to learning more about all of the topics that are to come. So again, if you could share with us to give us a sense of that, either by audio or by chat. Let's see. I think that's any comments or feedback before I move into getting us prepped for next week. Kathy, I see you. Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. You have been unmuted, Kathy.
Okay. I guess I just wanted to make a comment that's been running through my head the whole time. I'm not an executive director here at the YW, but I am in leadership position. And this has just been eye-opening because a lot of the tasks or the principles, I hear my executive director ask and we support her, and I never quite understood the whole scope of it. And I'm just like, okay, wow. Because I support her in a lot of the principles and the practices, I should say. And it really is eye-opening just to see how they all connect and to see why some of the things are emphasized more than others in our staff meeting, and what the decisions that are made. Not that I've questioned it, but it really makes sense to look at it this way. And I know one thing is the mission statement. It's one thing that I feel like if you have a strong mission statement that's communicated by your leadership to every single level with staff, it's in your every decision, everything, every program, everything that you do has to point to your mission statement or don't do it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that, I mean, it might seem like, yeah, we got our mission statement, but if that's not emphasized in different ways, if it's not like really clearly shown how to manifest it in the community or in your leadership, it gets lost. You raise money for the sake of raising money. You do this for the sake of it, not for the mission. Anyways, all of this is really kind of tying it together for me, or like connecting dots that that I just wasn't aware of before. So this has been really good so far for me on my level.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Any other There are some comments in the chat, I think I see.
Sure. So some of the comments that have been said, I think it's helpful to review all 12 as an overview and look forward to more focus on the 6. Adriana said, I think we often follow the funding rather than the mission statement. Yeah, I would agree. Oftentimes that is a challenge for some nonprofits, that mission creep towards the funding opportunities. Okay, there was a comment, Jamie, more of where other groups fall in terms of build, thrive, and sustain in their capacity assessment. Yeah, I think that will be really interesting to see those findings from this cohort and where we all are landing in those areas. There was a comment, I'm not an ED, but work closely with the ED and board. So much of this is very familiar to me. I see where we are not yet in the sustain mode yet. So that's an opportunity to grow. Lisa mentioned that I'm nodding my head with the statements being made right now. I too am not an ED, but in a management position, and now see more clearly where our shortfalls exist. Ignorance was bliss. Yes, that's a great point, Lisa. Valerie mentions the framework is helpful. I'd be interested in hearing more of your perspective as to some of the pitfalls for each principle based on what you've seen. Yes, that's really helpful, and you will get more of that, Valerie, as we continue on in this journey learning together. Catherine mentioned, I think the tools emphasize for me the importance of strong board engagement for fundraising and development. Latoya agrees with Adriana. So there's a lot of great engagement. And again, we will certainly keep a lot of that information in the forefront of our minds. And the more you engage in the chat, the more you reach out to us, the more you contribute during the class, it helps to guide and inform the direction in which we are providing the curricula throughout this program. So thank you for informing us in real time in the direction in which your organizations are wanting more information. So this is helpful. Yes, okay. And then Latoya also offered some resources from BoardSource. And again, I would also mention, if you are a member of the Center for Nonprofits, we do have an online library called Information Central, which has quite a few resources that are organized based on these 12 principles that we are are listed in the Principles and Practices Guide. So I encourage you, if you are not a member, to please join. If not, we certainly want to continue to engage you further and find ways to do so. In fact, there's more to come that you will likely get as a result of participating in this class. We are hoping that this continues to thrive as a cohort, and so that you can continue to support and stay in touch with one another. So thank you all for the engagement that you've had thus far.
Okay. Any other general comments or outside of what we've shared so far? If not, we're going to move into talking about what we can anticipate next week.
And I want to go ahead and answer a quick question that was placed in the chat regarding how to stay connected and engaged. We are developing a community called within our platform Center Connect that will be specifically for this cohort. So I want to give you all further information for how to log into that. If you're not a member and aren't currently utilizing that, what we're doing is at the conclusion of today's session, we will set up and make sure everyone has access to this community so that you can stay in touch with each other, and also the facilitator, Dr. Palmer, beyond this class and during the class as well. So thank you for the suggestion about the Facebook group. We'll be using our online community Center Connect.
Okay. There are a few comments in the chat, a few additional that I see, or questions. Let's see. Yeah, I see that one. Did we get all of those? I just didn't want to miss
Sure.
anyone.
Yes. Thank you for keeping it engaging. Thank you, Latoya. There was enjoy the breakout groups. More to come on that. Thank you, Jen, for that.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
wondering though about how we engage the board for fundraising purposes. If we also push for more diverse boards, that might not always work. If our boards look more like our clientele, they may also not have funds or connections. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the
Mhm.
fundraising and board governance. So that's an important
Mhm.
point to mention, or at least to consider. Jen, great to get broader perspectives from others.
Mhm.
Yes. And then Jamie mentioned that working for a nonprofit for 20 years and wish I had done this kind of program a long time ago. Thank you for that. So yes, opportunity to connect outside of social media platforms, I would appreciate it. And then there is another building on that comment above. I would like to know, as a board is diversified to represent the community, how do nonprofits train board members in duty of care? So all great questions that we will certainly cover as we're going through this course. These are really, thank you so much for providing this feedback, because again, as I continue to mention, this is going to inform how we're presenting the upcoming classes for you. Very great, great feedback.
Okay. Great. Okay. All right. So again, we're going to move into the closing of our session today and just talk a little bit about what's to come. So in terms of our follow-up and in terms of the evaluation, Salima mentioned that an evaluation will come later. And also, as you know, our next two topics are board governance and program design, management, and evaluation. So we have two topics that we're gonna fit into our time frame. Again, the same approach will be used, some breakout hands-on. We really want this to be a hands-on participatory experience. And so I'm going to pass it on to, I think it is it Rebecca Salima, who's going to tell us what else is coming up, or is that you?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're going to do a little bit of a tag team. So yes, thank you, Dr. Palmer, for the insight that you provided on today. I want to reiterate, thank you to all of you who participated. This is a really engaged group. I love groups that are participatory and especially in a virtual world where it's really difficult, where we like to be connected and with one another. And so I appreciate you all for making the best of a difficult time for all of us in our organization. So just wanted to give you a heads up. Rebecca will give you the logistics as far as what you will expect to anticipate following today's session, but the upcoming sessions you can see on your screen, board governance, as well as program design, management, and evaluation is to come on next week. You will receive your assessments that you provided in SurveyMonkey. So that is on the way. So please stay tuned for that. Rebecca's going to also share with you what you can anticipate in our follow-up email as well. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Sure thing. Thanks, Salima. So for sure, the recording of the session, once we get it edited a little bit to take out some sessions where we were strategizing when you all were in your breakout sessions. And then the PowerPoint presentation will be included, and a link to an evaluation, which is really important that you all take a couple minutes to complete. It's a quick one, I promise. I'll include an image of the Wordle that everybody contributed to with some of those principal topics that you all brainstormed. And then just to note too, regarding handouts, we intend to send those out earlier than we did this first time. Please know that that will come to you. Our goal will be Friday. And I'm not sure how quickly we'll be able to turn around the results from SurveyMonkey, but as Salima said, our intention is that you will get those prior to the next session, because I know that Dr. Palmer is going to want to review those so she can help tailor her content to fit some of your needs. So hopefully that sums up what you can expect from us. We really appreciate your time, and thanks so much.
I just wanted to add one quick thing before we pop off for today. Your individual survey results will be a separate email from the collective handout folder. So you will have 2 emails, one that's going to have all the attachments that's going to be in the collective SharePoint folder that we shared with you with all the handouts, and then there will be a separate email with your unique survey results, so we don't send that to the masses. Okay, so it will just be individualized for you and your organization. So I just wanted to mention that. And also we will send information for how you can begin to get connected with our Center Connect platform so you can continue to engage with one another. It is a pretty intuitive platform. It's kind of like a Facebook group, and we will make sure that we customize it where that will be a place where you can talk with each other. If you have further questions and how to connect with other resources, that will be your hub, as well as feel free to reach out to myself or Rebecca and also my colleague Leslie at any time throughout the course of our sessions, or you can email us if you have any further inquiries. We do appreciate all of you, and I would like to turn it over to either Dr. Palmer and or Jean for any closing remarks.
Jean, I will pass it over to you. Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to the weeks to come.
Good afternoon, everyone. I listened in to what I thought was such an exceptional program, and I just really appreciate all of the great work that really has been done here by our center staff and Dr. Palmer. I just really also appreciated all of the really good questions that you all asked, and am excited for this inaugural launching of our institute. So Salima, thank you again for your leadership, and thank you, Dr. Palmer, for your guidance, and Rebecca for your logistics, and for all of you coming on. I'll hand it back to you, Salima, and or Dr. Palmer.
All right, so without further ado, I bid you adieu. I hope you have a great remainder to your week, and please stay in touch with us. We're looking forward to next Tuesday, excuse me, next Tuesday. See you next week. Take care, everyone.
Bye, thanks everyone.